Your show will go live in 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Blog Talk Radio.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the program. This is the Trucking with Authority show. I'm your host, Kenny Long, and for the next hour, consider me your navigator on your journey to success in business, especially the trucking business. We can talk about anything here on the show tonight, from getting started as a driver, buying a truck, leasing to a carrier, changing to a new carrier, getting your own authority, dealing with the FMCSA, dispatch techniques, working with load boards, negotiating with brokers, trying to find and get direct freight, negotiating and quoting a load. We can discuss anything. The show is yours tonight. Tonight is Q&A night. I have just been barraged with questions. Obviously, the trucking market is looking good. It's strong. For this time of year, we're seeing very traditional trends dipping a little bit, but literally 1 or 2 pennies week over week. So it's stronger than even traditional trends. And we are still maintaining rates that we have not seen in really close to 3 years since we've been anywhere near close to what the rates are trending right now. So it's a phenomenal market. And because it's such a good market, business is booming and business is growing, which is a fantastic thing. It's always a good feeling when the market is good for business. So it's good for everybody. It's good for us as drivers. It's good for us as carriers. It is just good across the board. So it's a fantastic environment to be in. That being said, when business is booming, business owners start taking action. We're starting to see some pretty awesome stuff going on right now. A lot of people are buying trucks. A lot of people are getting their own authority or leasing to a carrier for the first time. And you know, that's a good thing in this market. I mentioned it before. There's a lot of things you have to be careful of. Don't be misled by a great market. In fact, sometimes I recommend that people start into business in a bad market, because if you can make it in a bad market, then the good times are bonus money. But when you start in a good market, if you get a little lax in your operations, it's very dangerous, because when the market turns around, a lot of people go out of business. And that's how supply and demand works. When the rates go up, more people buy trucks, fill the demand, rates plateau or level out. Sometimes they'll drop back down. People go out of business and rates go back up again. So that's really how the market works. That's how the free market works. Supply and demand drives that. Here on this show, I don't want any of you listening to ever fail. So I want to try to warn you to have the right systems in place. Try to help you understand your numbers, know the importance of building strong relationships, understand how to maintain and control your expenses. All of that is important, and really is all of those together combined are the keys to success. There's no one thing that you can do to guarantee success. It takes everything. Now, in a market like this, one thing might get you by, but the market always turns. You have to be prepared for the worst. So we'll talk about that tonight. I have been barraged with questions, and I've been watching a lot of social media, YouTube, Facebook, different things going on, different discussions going on. I'm blown away by some of the things I'm seeing. There are some interesting comments being made by some people that I think have a lot of respect in the industry, that I think should be providing better advice. And we'll talk about that a little bit tonight as well. So if you have any questions or comments, if you have anything you'd like to add, tonight is question and answer night. It's all about you. We are streaming live on Facebook, streaming live on YouTube, and as always, streaming live on Blog Talk Radio. If you are driving tonight and you are streaming one of the videos, just hang up the phone there. Call the number 917-889-9924. I would much prefer that you listen through your headphones or Bluetooth over the radio and not be trying to watch a video while you're going down the road. So there are plenty of ways to listen to the live stream. Again, call the number at the bottom of your screen, 917-889-9924. The show is yours tonight, question and answers. I am going to be going through a long list of questions and different things that I've seen discussed this past couple of weeks. Some things that I am a little concerned about, some of the advice that I see going around. I try not to get too in too many heated debates anymore in social media because there's so much that can be lost in translation. So I'm careful with that. That being said, there's some things out there that I'd really just have to comment on. If you're on the phone lines, when you call in the number, press number 1 on your keypad. That will raise your hand in the green room. Elizabeth is in the next room screening calls. This works just like a regular call-in radio show. Call in. You can listen live on the air. You do not come on live. This is not just a conference call. We have a screener in the other room. Any questions or comments that you may have, bring it. Tonight is your night. I'm also watching the comments on Facebook, but I've got so many things going on here. The Facebook comments will be the last thing that I get to. But there's a couple things already on there that I already have on my list to talk about. So I'm sure I'll answer some of those questions as we go. And again, we are streaming live on YouTube as well. I'm trying to open these different windows up and view all these things as we go. I'll try not to get too distracted. That being said, it's a lot easier for me to talk to you on the phone. Again, 917-889-9924. Elizabeth is in the other room, and we will get you on the air. So there was a lot of discussion today, or this week rather, about knowing your numbers and quoting a load. The way that I quote a load is apparently some people have a hard time understanding it. I think they would agree with me if they understood it better, but I have butted heads with some people, again, on social media, over the way that I teach to quote a load. Now, I want to be clear on something before we go any further. It's extremely, extremely important to know your cost, and you should know your cost per mile with all of your costs included. It's extremely important to know that. Now, for those of you that are drivers and you're about to buy your first truck, or if you've been an owner-operator and you're living paycheck to paycheck and you're trying to figure out how to get ahead, this is the number one thing you need to pay attention to. You need to know your cost per mile. And it's a very simple number to figure out. Now, in the beginning, when you're first starting out, you have to make some projections. Most people start projecting with some big numbers on the mileage side. They think that they'll be running 150,000 miles per year. And they make their projections based on that. In this market and in business, the goal is to run as few miles as possible, but to net as much as possible. If I can sit on the couch in the living room and still bring home $200,000 a year, that's what I want to do. If I have to drive 150,000 miles a year to get that kind of money, then that's what I'll do. But what's important is you need to understand what it takes to make the money without driving. So focusing on short miles with high revenue is more profitable, but you have to understand your numbers. Now, the problem with, in the beginning, basing your numbers on a big projection like 120, 150,000 miles per year is you find out you come up short at the end of the year and your numbers throughout the year have been quoted a little low. I am going to, in the next few weeks when I have some time, hopefully, I'm going to put together some spreadsheets and maybe do a YouTube video to try to demonstrate this a little more clearly. But in the beginning, you do have to make some projections because you don't have any numbers to base your running cost per mile on. Now, once you have run for a few months, you can start to actually narrow those numbers down. And certainly after you've got a year under your belt, 2, 3 years and beyond, your numbers can get closer and closer and more accurate. Now, the way you figure your cost per mile on a very broad 30,000 foot view explanation of this is you take your costs of everything you spend on your business. You take your truck payment, your insurance, parking, phone bills, office expenses, you name it, any expenses, you take all of that, you take your fuel bill, you take your maintenance, your tires, everything you can think of, and you divide that by the number of miles you've driven. Now, in the beginning, you may have a $20,000 down payment on a truck and another $15,000 on insurance and another, you buy a trailer and you've got some tires and you've got startup costs and expenses. So in the beginning, your cost per mile calculation is going to be very, very misleading because there was a time a friend of mine, he had put new injectors, in his truck. It was something like $7,500. Now, it happened in January. Now, I was talking to him, and he says, I cannot be profitable because my cost per mile is close to $4 per mile. The reason he thought that was because here we are in January. His books started over fresh for the year. He spent $7,500, and he had only driven a few miles for the year, and his cost was exponential. Kind of the same problem with new startup ventures. You buy a truck for the first time. You don't have anything to divide those numbers with. Now, obviously, he knew better. He divided it over a more reasonable number, worked it into the year previous. If you were a startup, you would take that initial startup cost, divide it over the first few years, figure out roughly what you think your cost will be. Once you've been running for a few years, those numbers start to equalize. You start to get into numbers. Now, I've had people tell me that their cost per mile is 60 cents, 70 cents per mile. Now, that is their fuel cost and maybe a few pennies a mile for maintenance. The problem is, at some point, you'll have to replace that truck. At some point, that paid-off truck will break down with major expenses, $25,000 engine rebuilds, $11,000 transmissions, and major expenses. They happen. So if you're running on these 60, 70 cent cost per mile numbers, you're just way too far off. The other mistake people make is they say, I run for whatever it costs me and whatever is left is mine. And that's pretty much the extent of how they've calculated their costs. Whatever is left at the end of the week is mine. They have not allocated an account for maintenance. They haven't figured out what their future expenses may be. They don't have any savings. And then what happens to drivers that think like that is they get a flat tire and they have to call their carrier to borrow money for the repairs. So it's extremely important to budget for repairs and maintenance as well. Whatever is left over at the end of the week is not all yours. It's not all profit. It's not all your pay. Some of that has to go back into the business. Some of that has already been spent. You just don't know it yet. So you have to know your numbers. You have to understand your costs. So knowing your cost per mile is extremely helpful. And now, as it's misleading in the beginning, it can also be a little misleading further down the road. As you've started to narrow these numbers down and you start to get a cost per mile number in the $1.20 to $1.50 range, which is what most people end up with, then it starts to become a number that you focus on. Now, this is where my calculation starts to upset people that are basing all of their costs or all of their numbers and their walkaway numbers on a cost per mile. Now, here's the problem. We already know that in the beginning, your cost is exponential to your cost to your miles because you haven't run any miles yet. Okay, we know that if you spend $150,000 on a truck in your first year, if that was what you actually spent that year, and you hadn't driven any miles yet, your cost for that first mile is 150,000 miles per year, right? I mean, you take your cost, you divide it by miles. If somebody said, hey, drive down the road 1 mile, that's your cost per mile. Okay, so that's misleading. Now, the other end of that spectrum is you've got it narrowed down. You've got a few years under your belt. Your cost per mile has been narrowed down to the penny, $1.20, $1.23. Okay, so you know exactly what your cost per mile is. What happens is somebody calls you and says, hey, I have this fantastic load. And you know that you can be profitable, pay your driver, come home with a healthy profit. If you can get your $1.50 or $1.75, $2, whatever your number is, you can be profitable on a per mile basis. And they say, I've got this load, it's 500 miles. Instantly, you go to that, I need $2 a mile number. And so instantly you throw out, I need $2 a mile. I need, for 500 miles, I need $1,000 for that run. Now, if you base all your numbers on a cost per mile, that will cover it, right? What it does not take into account is the time frame. You have to account for the time involved. Now, if that 500-mile run picks up today and delivers tomorrow, and you can do another 500 miles tomorrow, that may work out perfect. Let's say, for example, that you run 500 miles a day, 5 days a week, 2,500 miles a year. You take a few weeks off at the end of the year. I always work out to where it works out to 120,000 miles, just because that's a standard number people use. Let's say you do exactly 120,000 miles per year. Exactly. Because in order to know your numbers, you have to be exact. 120,000 miles per year, exactly at 25,000 or 2,500 miles per week. You take 2 months off, so 44 weeks. That's eight weeks off. We'll come back to that. If you do that, and then at the end of the year, you've run a full year that way, your cost per mile has been spot on. You've generated that. You've made your money. You know exactly how much you need to make. You know exactly how much you've made. January 1st, the following year, a new customer comes along and says, hey, I have a run for you. You are going to love it, but it's dedicated. It's only 250 miles per day. You just cut your mileage in half. You say, fantastic, I can do 250 miles a day. You already know in your head, I need $2 per mile because this is my cost per mile. I've got it figured out to the penny. Before we go any further, I just want to have a little disclaimer. I'm throwing just big round numbers out. Your cost per mile is not going to be exactly $2 per mile. Nobody needs exactly $2 per mile to run, but we're going to throw that out there. So you say, I need exactly $2 per mile run, 250 miles per day. I can do it for 500 miles. You've effectively just cut your revenue in half. Okay, so now instead of running 2,500 miles a week, you're running 1,250 miles per week. You've cut your miles in half. You've cut your revenue in half. Will it still cover your expenses? Now, what did not get cut in half when you started running less miles? Obviously, you're using less fuel. So your fuel cost is going to be a little less. It should be exactly half because your miles got cut exactly in half. Your fuel cost is less. Your maintenance, oil changes get spread out twice as long, right? Less oil changes every year. Maintenance cost, tire wear, all that should be cut in half. All those are variable expenses. What did not get cut in half is your truck payment. At the end of the month, you still have to make that. If you have a new truck, it might be a $3,000, $3,500 a month truck payment. That doesn't get cut in half. Your insurance payment does not get cut in half unless you've got a decent-sized fleet that's based on a mileage type program. But for the most part, the insurance doesn't get cut in half. Your fixed costs, your office expenses don't get cut in half. I don't think your accountant's going to charge you half as much to file your tax return at the end of the year. Your Verizon or AT&T, they're not going to charge you half as much on your phone bill. Those didn't get cut in half. The only thing that got cut in half was your variable expenses. Okay? What I think people need to understand is the time it takes to generate a certain amount of money. So a cost per mile is great. Cost per mile is a fantastic number to know. If you can average that out over the months and over the years, your cost per mile is extremely important because if you can see a drastic change in your cost per mile, so for the past 5 years, you know that you've run at exactly $1.20 per mile. You've pretty run consistent freight, consistent lanes. All of a sudden you see my cost just shot up to $1.60 per mile. What happened? You can look back at your records and say, well, my fuel mileage went from 8 miles to the gallon, dropped down to 4 miles per gallon. That spiked my cost up 30 cents a mile. What happened? You can look at that. You can identify a problem. You can look and say, my cost per mile went up 10, 20, 30 cents a mile. Why is that? Well, because my mileage, I used to run 120,000 miles a year. Now, this year, I landed something new, dedicated. I get home every weekend. I'm happy about that, but my mileage got cut. Instead of 120,000, I'm only running 70,000 now. Your cost per mile went up. Maybe it goes the other way. Maybe your cost per mile drops. Maybe you see that I was running $1.20 per mile, and now this month I'm only at $1.10 per mile. What happened? Well, you can see that, I used to run in the mountains. Now I pick some lanes that are in the southeast. I run Florida and Georgia, and that's it. And my cost per mile dropped. And maybe you look at the other side of it. That's your cost, But maybe if you look at the other side and your revenue hasn't changed much, maybe you just realize that that's a good way to make an extra 10 cents per mile because you've reduced your cost. So knowing your cost per mile is a great way to identify problems and recognize new opportunities. It's extremely important to know your combined everything cost per mile. But as I was talking about before, you have to know the time involved. So going back to a run, they say, yes, I have a run for you. It's 500 miles. Instantly you say, okay, I need $2 a mile for that. It'll be $1,000. So you run today, you run 500 miles, you deliver it next morning. You've made your $1,000. You've worked it out. Your cost works fine. You pick up another load for 500. That works great with your calculations. What happens if that same broker calls you and says, I have this load as 500 miles, but you can't deliver it tomorrow morning. It's going to be late tomorrow evening or the following morning. Now you have twice as much time. You have 2 days on that same load. You could have picked up a load and run 500 miles today, delivered first thing tomorrow, run another 500 miles tomorrow. Remember, I'm using nice, round, easy numbers just for an example. I'll work out a spreadsheet with the specifics and use a real-world demonstration using nice, round numbers for the example. So nobody needs to lambaste me on these groups about how I, 500 mile and whatever it is. Okay, so what happens when you spread those 500 miles out over 2 days? Now, instead of getting 500 miles a day, you get 250 miles average per day, right? So effectively, you have just cut your revenue. We already did this example. You've cut your revenue from what would have been, revenue on 120,000 miles to 60,000 miles a year, if that's what happened every day, right? So you've cut that. What you have to do is figure out your fixed cost. Forget about your variable cost. Forget that. Forget your fuel. Forget your maintenance. Forget that part of it, okay? What you need to do is figure out your fixed cost daily. Now, there's another YouTube guy that's trying to explain how important cost per mile is. I don't disagree with knowing your cost per mile and how important it is. But what he has a problem understanding and comprehending is the time value of these loads. So his explanation for this was, if you miss out on 500 miles the next day, you should charge $2,000. Because if it was $1,000 for one day because you'd get 500 miles, the next day you should charge $2,000 because that's your missed opportunity, your 500 miles. Here's the problem with that. Your 500 miles, if you didn't do those, did it cost you that much? Is your cost for that day really the 500 miles? You didn't burn any fuel. You had virtually no maintenance that day because you didn't run. So the cost for that day is not 500, it's equivalent to what it would be if you actually ran 500 miles. Your variable cost is not included. So you need to understand what your fixed cost per day actually is. And I see a couple of comments here on Facebook that are commenting on a few things I'm saying. I'm going to come back to a couple of these points real quick. So I have done a show in the past, and I'm going to do a show dedicated exclusively just to this, is how to quote a load, know your numbers, and know your cost per day. A couple of points I want to make on this. When I go, and I do a presentation on this in groups, okay, and typically, and I've talked about this a number of times, but typically I get somebody, like I said, that's at the extreme minimum. They say I can do it 60 cents per mile. That's my cost, okay? My cost per mile is 60 cents per mile. I always use that person as an example, and I say, well, how much do you pay your driver? The answer is almost always, well, I drive it myself. I don't have a driver. So your truck doesn't go down the road by itself. Somebody is driving it. Somebody is employed driving your truck. Is it you? If you're driving your truck yourself, are you willing to work for free? In most cases, the response to that is no. So just food for thought on this. If you are willing to dip into your own pay, you're willing to cut your own pay, you're willing to work for free in some cases, is that the best business plan? Is that the best idea? So what I urge you to do is work driver pay. And you can do this either on a fixed expense side or on a variable mileage expense side. Most of the big fleets now, they do a cost per mile on a driver pay. So they might pay a driver 45 or 50 cents per mile. That's their pay. That's an expense for that fleet. Now, you as a single truck owner operator, maybe you have 1 or 2 trucks. If you hire a driver, how much would you pay that driver to replace you? This is another point that I've made. I've had people tell me that they could hire somebody to replace them for 32 cents per mile. Okay, 32 cents per mile. If you can hire somebody to do everything that you do for 32 cents per mile, what makes you worth more? Why are you worth any more than 32 cents per mile? Just food for thought. Obviously, if somebody else can do what you're doing, you are only worth 32 cents per mile as well. So just remember that, because your customers will recognize your personal value. Now, as the owner of the truck, there is a business owner should profit something. Okay, goes back to the idea of why a lot of people think that I drive, I pay my expenses, I pay the fuel, I pay the truck payment. After that, everything that's left over is mine. No, you have to remember there are other expenses that keep building throughout the year. If you, let's say you make an extra $1,000 that you didn't, every week you make $2,000 a week, and this week you made $3,000. Does that mean that $3,000 can all go in your bank account and you can take a trip to Disney World? Well, when you take that trip to Disney World, how much do you make the following week? So keep that in mind as well. You have to have money set aside. Understand your cost per mile. Understand your fixed cost. Another warning. Do not focus exclusively on a cost per day either. Cost per day. Let's say that you have a team in a truck and they can do 1,200 miles per day. And you focus on, well, I only need $1,000 per day. That's my cost per day for that truck. Well, now you are running at or below your actual cost. If you ran 1,000 miles or 1,200 miles and then you quoted that load at $1,000 per day, or maybe you quoted it $2,000 per day because you wanted $2 per mile. Do you know without a doubt that you will cover your expenses after you pay your drivers, after you pay your fuel, maintenance, truck payment, insurance, office expenses, everything? That cost per day by itself is extremely dangerous. This is where I think the gentleman on YouTube does not like my idea, because I think he thinks that I want you to talk about cost per day only. And that's absolutely incorrect. There are 2 schools of thought. One is on a cost per day. One is on a cost per mile. They both work in the right situations. If you're running short miles all the time, cost per day works. If you're running a lot of miles all the time, cost per mile works. If you have a combination where today you're running 500 miles, tomorrow you don't know, it could be 200, 250, 300, you don't know. If you don't know exactly how many miles you'll be running at the end of the week or at the end of the month or at the end of the year, exactly. And I'm not talking about an estimated, I think I'll run 120,000 miles this year. I think I'll get about 100,000. If you don't know exactly right now, you cannot base any of your numbers on a cost per mile. You cannot base any of your numbers unless you know exactly how many days you'll be working. You cannot do it exclusively on a cost per day. You can make some generalizations and estimations on both of those figures, but if you don't know exactly, you can't use either of those by themselves. You really have to have a good combination of those two. So go back and you could just Google search Trucking with Authority quoting a load, or the load quote, I think is what that show is called. Check it out. And Joe Cox, in one of the Facebook groups, right on the top of the list here, says, don't forget retirement. Savings, retirement, all of that has to go into your plan as well. There are a lot of people out there that, the baby boomers are retiring from these big, big companies with their retirement plans, and they don't worry about the retirement. Well, they've earned that money the whole 30 or 40 years that they were working. The company always put it aside for them. If you are self-employed, it's up to you to do that. Don't forget that an hourly employee that's making $20 or $25 per hour, that if they have other retirement benefits, they're actually generating more. So you really, as a self-employed owner-operator, you can't compare your pay to what a company driver would make, or what other companies that have matched 401ks and health benefits and all these different things. Look at the total value and what these other trucks are making. Now, really quick, David says, wow, 2 months off. I'd like to work for that guy. I can't give myself 8 weeks off or I'd fire myself. I am willing to bet that if you went back and looked at your logs, now, I say 8 weeks off, but remember this. Right off the bat, you're off 10 days a year. Even if you work round the clock, you're off 10 days a year for holidays. Nobody delivers on Christmas, New Year's, those days. There are 10 federal holidays where almost everything is closed. Right off the bat, that's 10 days. Most people between New Year's and Christmas take a week or 2 weeks off there. Most people take a week or 2 weeks off somewhere in the summertime, or a combination of. Add in your weekends. Now remember, I said, I base my numbers like 2,500 miles per week. If you're running 500 miles a day, those are 5-day weeks. You got 7 days a week. If a 3-day weekend comes out of that somewhere, if you don't find a load on Monday, or if you shut down early on Friday, or your truck is in the shop for a day, a few of those here and there adds into another week. Five 3-day weekends is a week off. If you really look at how many days your truck is generating revenue, and I'm not talking about you're just out away from home. You have to look at how many days your truck is generating revenue. So if you're out on the road taking a 34-hour restart, you're not generating revenue. So all combined, I'd be willing to bet the way I kind of do this for brand new owner operators that when they come through the door and they say, I am going to run 120,000 miles a year and I'm going to burn the roads up. I am just going to get out there and tear it up. I'm going to stay out. I'm going to live in the truck. I tell them right off the bat, you're probably going to take 8 weeks off. And they say, there's no way I'm going to take 8 weeks off. Just like Dave said, no way I'm going to take 8 weeks off. Okay. Like I said, you got your 10 days and holidays. You take a week off here and there. Your truck will go in the shop. One of our drivers is in the Facebook group right now. She just took a week off, unplanned. She didn't want to, didn't have a choice. Truck was in the shop, and it happens. Another driver, one of her fleet there, she took a month off last month. Same reason. Truck was in the shop. It was unplanned. Didn't know it was going to be down for a month. They said, yeah, we'll get to it in a couple days. You'll have it back. You'll be back within a week. Well, one thing led to another, and by the time it was all done, it was close to a month. You don't plan for it. It just happens. So if you look at that, most people, now if you run 2,500 miles per week, and you run that, you take 8 weeks off, 2 months off. Now, when I do the numbers here, what I like to say is, let's take 1 month off. It's 12 months in a year. We'll take 1 month off. Take all the holidays and the extra days off, the 3-day weekends. We'll take 1 month. That's 11 months out of the year. 4 weeks in a month, that's 44 weeks, right? But there's 4 weeks in a month, that's 44 weeks. It's actually 52 weeks in a year. That's 8 weeks off. Okay? So that's kind of how I do it. Now, 5-day weeks. 44 weeks times 5, 220 days. Do the math on that. Times 500 miles. That's 120,000. Now, I never start with that mileage figure. Most people come to me and say, I'm going to run 120,000 miles a year. The average is around 100 to 110. 120 is on the high side. There are people, of course, that run 150 or more a year, but the average for a driver is in that neighborhood of 110 right now. All right. But don't come into this trying to figure out that you're going to run 120,000, because that gentleman on YouTube that I kind of have a disagreement with on this, when he's talking about his drivers, he says his wording is, when he's talking to drivers, he says, when you're going out there and making miles, that's his thought process on this. When you're making miles, I don't know about you, but I never got involved in this industry to go out there and drive more miles and make more miles. I got into this to make more money. And I can tell you from experience that there is more money in less miles in most cases. You really have to understand the market and know how to quote your loads properly and take time as a factor. Okay, so I didn't plan on spending that much time just on quoting the load idea. I had a couple other things I wanted to get to as well. We do have some calls on the line. Let me jump on and take these calls, knock these out, and we'll come back to the other questions. We'll go to Gerald in California. Gerald, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
What's going on, Mr. Kenny? How you doing today, sir?
Fantastic. How are you doing, Gerald? It's been a while.
I can't complain. Just had a little crossroads in business-wise, and I figured I'd call and get some advice.
Sure.
Yeah, so here's what I got going on. I currently run for the van lines. I do speccom work. Been doing this for the last couple of years. Before that, I was at Landstar. So over here, of course, is force dispatch. That doesn't bother me. It's all good. But I'm at the crossroads now where I'm trying to do just what you were just talking about. Work less, make more money. Currently at the van lines, I am running. I've been here 2 years. Both years right at 120,000 miles. And my I shouldn't say net. Right now I'm grossing 220 a mile to the truck. Both years right around there. And that's fine and all, but the problem is I'm gone a lot. Like, I work a lot.
Right.
And I'm trying to change that. So I'm at a crossroads here where I'm considering getting a trailer, going back to Landstar, getting my own authority, or leasing on with somebody else. I prefer the own authority route, but it is scary.
Yeah.
So, I'm just trying to figure out I got a couple questions here, and, because you hear a lot of things, and one of the biggest things I worry about is being a new guy with your new numbers. You're out there, and a lot of people want to work with you, and sometimes the people that will work with you don't have the freight you really want to do. So how long is that kind of like stick it out period? And that goes right into my next question, which, how much money do you really need to have, set aside? About 3 to 6 months worth of bills, I'm assuming, something like that.
Well, we'll get to that. It's funny because those two things are here on my list. Is now a good time, and how much money does it take to get started? Do you have other questions as well? Just pile them on. Let's just knock them out.
Okay, Roger. Let me pull my list back up.
You do have a list. Okay.
So here we go. So, yeah, yeah. I would write them down as I'm thinking of them driving down the road. So because when I was at Landstar and what I do now, I kind of want to do the same thing. I enjoy the pad wrap, the decking, the liftgate work. So, part of the reason why I came to the van line was to do specifically that and to get better at it. Because when you're at Landstar, you're not going to do the same exact work that I do now. It's a lot more intensive and a lot more, driver focused where, they give you the load and then it's on you to figure everything else out, which I do like because they don't bother you. It's your job to get it done. You mess up, you pay a claim. That's all there is to it.
Right.
And so that's one of the questions. And also, like, getting a liftgate trailer right off the bat. Like, since I don't have any contacts that do liftgate freight, is that something I should just go right into and get it because that's what I eventually want to do, or is that something I should wait on and just get a regular drive? Obviously, with your logistics posts and all that stuff, and just add the liftgate later, either to keep costs down for now or, just go ahead and go for it since that's my eventually plan anyway. Okay.
All right. So, first of all, how much money is it going to take to start up? And is now a good time to get started? There are a lot of brokers that will not work with you when you're new. Okay, so that's not a rumor. That's true. For the most part, though, no matter when you start this business, no matter when you decide that you're going to pull the trigger and make it happen, for the most part, that's always going to be the case. But everything is negotiable. Okay, so in 2015, 2016, the way the capacity was, brokers tend to if they didn't want to work with you, they would just find the next best truck. Right now, there may not be a next best truck. So as far as that goes, this is probably a really good time to get your own authority if that is your concern. If you're worried about certain brokers not working with you. There's still going to be some that won't. Okay, I can't tell you that everybody will work with you. But if they need you bad enough, they will bend the rules, especially some of the smaller ones. I can tell you right off the bat that most of the big brokers will work with you. Most of the small brokers will work with you. It's those middle guys that are a little picky. The big guys, they'll take the risk because they can afford it. Small guys, they'll take the risk because they're desperate. The ones in the middle, they can't really afford you. They've got capacity elsewhere. But right now in this market, they're probably more willing. There are more people willing to negotiate that with you and accept the extra risk because you're new. Now, so that's going to happen one way or the other. I think there's a lot of value to leasing onto a carrier that already has contacts. I think there's a lot of value to leasing onto a carrier that will handle all of the headaches, of the back office and everything. There's a lot of value to that. I do think, from day one, when I started this show in 2014, I opened the show with, there is no better time than now to get your own authority. And I still say that. Here I am building a fleet, okay, of owner-operators, and I still say that. Every owner-operator, when they come to me, I tell them when you are ready, and most of them tell me they're not ready yet, or they see the value. I mean, and as we're growing here at Patriot Star, there's tremendous value. I didn't even realize how important it was, but there is tremendous value in growing a team, you know, as you go forward. We have brokers that, you know, prefer to work with us because they know that we can get the job done, and we have some hardworking, you know, dedicated people that will, you know, go out of their way to get it done. We're not, you know, just a number, and we really have a family atmosphere here, that's important. So if you can find the right carrier to lease to, I think there is benefit there as well. So it's kind of, you go back and forth. It's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. I think starting on your own, you may take a hit for the first few months on not having the contacts. You could go to a carrier that has the contacts that can, you know, get you started off on the right foot. So, you know, that's really a personal decision. If you're ready to make it happen, if you are confident, you said you're afraid, but you know, nobody makes any changes because they're comfortable, right? So if you think you're ready, then I think now is as good a time as any. All right. That being said, there's a lot of value in finding a team to join and going right to work. And you know, the other thing is with benefits and things of working with a fleet, if you go home and you're on your own, that phone never stops ringing. You don't get the opportunity to turn your business off. When you're leased to a fleet, you do. You know, the fleet kind of takes over. When you're not working, you're not working. Okay, so there's pros and cons to both. I can't tell you which way to go. I am extremely happy with the team that we are building at Patriot Star. And I think the drivers that have chosen to lease with us, and again, I've told every one of them that I will help them build their business. And when the day comes that they want to leave, I don't mind if anybody ever leaves us. I hope that they're happy enough that they never want to. But if they do, as long as they're moving forward, I'll help them fill out the paperwork. But if I don't want anybody to fail under me, I try my best to give everybody all the tools available. If you find the right carrier that can do that, and I think you know, that might be a better option. So it kind of goes both ways. So I think it's a good time to start if you're ready. Good time to get in with a good carrier if you're ready. I think it's a bad time right now to be leased to one of the big mega fleets where you're just another number in their system, where you don't have any power to negotiate. I certainly would not want to be on anything that's, you know, pay per mile right now. I mean, you need to be on something where you have a little more control over your revenue. Something where you can self-dispatch. I know with, you know, companies like you mentioned Landstar, you can self-dispatch, but there's virtually zero negotiation with a company like that. I mean, pennies per mile on, you know, fuel surcharge and different things, but, you know, the negotiation is not the big money-making opportunities it is on your own. So there's a lot of trade-offs in the market. As far as your equipment, that was another thing on my list. What type of trailer should I get? So I get questions all the time. Should I buy what type of trailer? Should I get a flatbed, a step deck, a reefer, a van? What should I get? In your case, you're wondering, you want to get a van, a logistics van, but should you get a liftgate? Should you get that specialized equipment? To give everybody a little background, a few years ago, I bought a trailer from the caller Gerald here. His trailer was spec'd out pretty great. I bobtailed from Florida all the way to California to get it because I was that happy with the way he had his trailer spec. So he knows a few things about trailers. The trailer you had before, I think, was a good middle ground. You were talking about lift gates. I think we have a couple of liftgate trailers running for us now. Most of the time, not always, but most of the time, ramps suffice, which is why, you know, the trailer that I bought from you had ramps on it. So most of the time, ramps, you know, will do the trick. Sometimes they ask for a liftgate, you know, they find out ramps will be fine. There's a few things, you know, slot machines, things like that, they absolutely require a liftgate. They're very particular about that, but most stuff ramps will do. What we have found is if you have a liftgate, you go to the job. I mean, there was one in particular, they absolutely needed a liftgate. It said, you know, big bold letters on the rate confirmation, liftgate required, driver assist, driver unload, all this stuff. Typically, a lot of the liftgate type work is that, you know, driver assist. I go to, it was here at one of the Disney resorts. I back into a dock. No liftgate required. I think, okay, well, they don't need it here. They must need it at the other end. You know, this is some kind of show freight stuff. They're going to need it at the other end, right? So I drive down. It was going down somewhere near Miami, some other high-end resort. Pull in there, go inside. I find the crew that I was, you know, supposed to find to unload it. Oh, yeah, pull around back. There's a dock. Back into another dock. I asked them, why did you order a liftgate? Oh, we didn't order a liftgate. We don't need a liftgate. I'm not sure. So we find that to be the case. We do quite a bit of liftgate work, but a lot of times, I'd say, you know, 50% of the time, they ask for a liftgate and they never use it. And another, you know, out of the other 50% that's left, 25% of those can probably use ramps. So it's really just communication. And so we have a lot of contacts in that field, and we, in fact, we've kind of become, you know, that's our niche with the vans. And so we found that ramps are a good middle ground because it gets your foot in the door with a lot of these customers. It doesn't restrict you. You know, with a liftgate, there's certain, you know, customers you can't go. They have one of those dock locks. They won't accept you with a liftgate. You can't slide your tandems quite as well with the liftgate. There's some limitations with that. It's heavy. Requires the, you know, cable to run to the batteries on the back from your truck. And I mean, so, you know, there's limitations. So unless you do that quite exclusively, I don't know that it's the best situation. We have a trailer out there now running it exclusively with the liftgate, and they have to focus on, you know, that logistics, really lightweight work. They do okay. Do they do better than some of the other general freight vans? I don't know. There's weeks that it works out great, especially in the prime season. But the rest of the time, it's a coin toss. I think being equipped with a trailer like you had before, where you had a storage box underneath, you had some ramps, you can carry the pads, you can carry the bars, and you know you have the equipment to do most logistics work, but you're still open to do most of the general freight work. In my opinion, if you'll be in a van and that's the field you want to start working your way into, that's the way to start. My opinion.
Nope. And trust me, I'm calling you because your opinion is valued. And that's exactly what I'm looking at. Matter of fact, I saw the driver, like I was telling Elizabeth, I saw the driver pulling my old trailer 2 days ago coming through Arizona. He was headed eastbound, I was headed westbound, and I just waved as it went by. But yeah, that's exactly, you know, what I'm looking at doing is getting that. And that's what I said, because I mean, you can always add a liftgate later if your customer base decides, hey, we would really like you to do this, and we're gonna, you know, then you can go that way. But to get a trailer without one, obviously, is much cheaper, and it's easier to find a trailer without one. So that's probably the way I'm going to go in general. Now I just have to decide, you know, and like you were talking about the back office work, that's kind of what is the scary part for me, because I've always been decent at negotiating freight and hauling my own stuff and booking my own stuff. I have no problem with that, but it's all the paperwork, getting your authority, getting your, like, you know, just in California alone, to get California apportioned plates, they want $2,800. And I'm just like, wow, you guys are killing me here. Everything is expensive on the West Coast. I wish I could leave, but my wife won't let me, so that's a whole nother story. But it's so, I mean, that's what I'm really looking for, and I'm hoping to make a move, you know, at the latest by May. I got to give my 30-day at my current company. But the people, like I said, the people I work for, good people. I enjoy working for them. I just need more control over myself and more home time. You know, that's my biggest thing. And I was so used to that at Landstar, even though, like you just mentioned, my phone never stopped ringing, because I always had to keep looking forward to the next load. If I wanted to leave on Wednesday, I couldn't start looking for a load on Wednesday. You start Friday, Thursday, Monday morning. So your time off is really never your time off. Whereas, like you just said, that's part of that I do appreciate working where I'm at now. When I'm off, I'm off.
Yeah.
Nobody's calling me. Nobody's asking me to do nothing. So that part I really do appreciate. And so, you know, I kind of don't want to give that up, and I'm looking for a combination of obviously the best of both worlds, and we can work something out. Because getting a trailer and all that stuff is easy. It's finding a carrier and somebody you trust and somebody that you can work with is the hard part.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't know if you have support from home. You know, it is difficult to run a business. If you got your own authority and you didn't have anybody else, you know, staying behind to help you run the paperwork, bill the customers, invoicing, collections calls, all of the necessary things, then I do see a value in leasing to a carrier. I think you have some support there, but, you know, that's really, you know, that comes back to a personal decision. How much of that do you want to, you know, hassle with? You know, owner-operators, the more risk you take and the more work you put in, the harder it gets, the less freedom you have. You can dispatch yourself. You can be home more often, but that just means you may be working in the office instead of on the road, or you may be working on the truck. A lot of owner-operators that lease to a carrier, they find themselves, they go home, they're changing their own oil, or they're, doing whatever they have to do on their own truck all the time. When you get your own authority, you have to do all of that and have to do the office work, billing, collections, compliance, all of those, tedious little things. And believe me, that even at our level now, the paperwork in the office is really what just kills us. It's just, I'm struggling to find the right system to put in place. I'm always looking for a good system, because there's a lot of little things out there for the small 1 and 2 truck carriers. There's a lot of great systems for the mega fleets that have 300 plus trucks. There's nothing in the middle there for the 15, 20 truck carriers where we're at. And so it's a struggle.
Gotcha.
So, I mean, every business at every level has their struggles. You have to decide which way you want to go with it. In my case, I have options. I could buy some really expensive software to take the workload off, or maybe it's better to invest my money in hiring more employees to try to just do it manually. Or and in your case, it's, do I want to get my own authority, handle all that myself, sacrifice the home time for office work, or do I want to lease to a carrier where I can go home, just get my settlement at the end of the week, hang it up? There's a lot of personal decisions to be made in that as well.
Nope, that is very true, and you're exactly right. That's the hard part. Like, I don't want to. I can already know myself right now, and I don't want to, when I come home, have to do more work when I get home. When I get home, I just want to relax and hang out with my family. My wife is a stay-at-home mom. We have 3 kids. I'm trying to get home and just hang out with them, and I spend enough time away to come home and be like, no, Daddy still has to, do this and do that, and then, it's time to go back to work, and they're like, well, all you did was do this, like during tax season when I get home and I'm doing all that paperwork, and that's just not fun work, So, for me personally, I know I'm probably going to go the lease to a carrier route, just because it works out better for me and what I'm looking for. So for me, I'm just going to find the people that are best suited for what I want to do and want to help me learn along the way. But, I have control over what I do. And if I find that, then it's simple enough and it's an easy choice.
Well, I think you have, you've got a lot of decisions to make. We're always here to help. And, you've got our cell phone numbers, I think, directly. So you're welcome to reach out to us at any time. We've, built a relationship with you, through social media over the past couple of years after we bought the trailer from you. So, if you have questions along the way, feel free to reach out, and hopefully, the decisions won't be that difficult once you make them. But again, nobody makes decisions like this because they're comfortable. You're afraid to take the next step. That's a good thing. A little bit of fear and being uncomfortable to do something is the reason why you need to make a change. So that it's just growth. So I understand it's going to be a hard decision to make, but I'm confident that you'll make the right one. So I'm going to put you back on hold. I appreciate the call, Gerald, and just keep us in the loop, and feel free to call back anytime. We're going to jump over to Chris in Tennessee and take things back to talking about rates a little bit. Hey, Chris, what's on your mind?
When we were going over rates, or you were explaining how to figure out what your rate per mile is, it just had me thinking, me and Jason, we poured a lot of work into figuring out what it was. And he made me do all the work, too. I didn't get to just use his number. But we came up with a Excel spreadsheet. This is really easy to bid on the fly. We charge by day, by the mile. And what I really like about it, and what we did with it, was we figured out everything in our life, every regular reoccurring bill, personal and business related. And then whatever we make on top of that number at the end of the day is like pure profit. And so I know, like, when I bid a load And what my walkaway number is, that as long as I make that walkaway number, Netflix is getting paid, the truck's getting paid, insurance is paid, my wife's health insurance is paid, everything's covered. I'm just not making that little bit extra.
Right.
Spending money. And it was really helpful too, because we base it, the way I manipulated it is where you have our daily rate, and then in a strong market, you can drop down how many miles in a day you're willing to cover. So if a broker comes at you with a 1,200 mile run in a strong market, I'll leave mine at like 500 miles a day. That's my daily rate. And if I'm in a weak market, I might up it to 600, 650, and I'll max out around 700. That helps me be more competitive in a weaker market, so I can still turn those miles, and I'll know I'll still be able to make my numbers. And we charge, and it's a figure by the day, plus we figure deadhead, loaded miles, exact pump price is figured into all of that. So, like, you know, that's another thing I see on Facebook too. People talk about fuel surcharge. We don't do fuel surcharge unless it's a dedicated customer that you have on contract. We charge exactly how much it costs to run the truck from wherever I'm at, where I delivered last, to where I'm picking up, to where I'm delivering.
Exactly.
You're paying for all that fuel.
Yeah.
And I mean, and right now, cost per mile is important. Figuring out your numbers is important, but right now, I mean, like you say all the time, you can just fall out of the truck into a pile of cash. I come up low on every load when I'm looking at it, you know, and the broker's like, I read the lane and I got my number and I'm $1,000 under what the lane average is. And I'm like, well, okay,
right,
go with the lane average.
And, you know, right now it's easy to hit those numbers, but when things turn, or if you get into a bad market, you know, if you take a load into South Florida, you never know what you're going to get out. You might have to deadhead out. So you have to know to factor that in. You have to adjust for that. And I really like, well, there's a couple things, points I want to make on that. Number one is you have all this figured out ahead of time. Whatever system anybody uses, knowing the numbers ahead of time is extremely valuable, because when you're talking to a broker and you're trying to negotiate, if you are confident with your numbers, confidence will win every time. So however you came up with your number, whatever system, you know, for everybody listening, whatever system you choose to use, when you go into a negotiation, know those numbers and be confident in your numbers, because as a broker, I have gotten calls, and you know they'll call and I'll say, well, what do you need to move this load? And they waver and they hem and they haw and they have no clue. I promise you that people that have no clue and if they do have a number, they're just guessing. If they're just throwing a number, I need $1,000 a day or whatever, they're just throwing a number out there hoping that it sticks, right? If they don't know, if they're not confident, I win every time in that negotiation. Every time, because they have no clue. Right? And, you know, so if somebody just throws out a random number, they say, I need $1,500, hoping that you come up with, you know, $1,200 or something. And if you're strong and you are, you know, as a broker, I'm confident, and I say, I'm going to do this for $1,000. I'm confident I can get it moved for $1,000. That driver that has no clue, and they were hoping that they'd throw 15 and it would stick, maybe they'd get $1,250. I guarantee they'll come down to 12, 1150, 11, you know, 1050. I guarantee it, because they don't really know. They have no clue. They're not confident when they do it. And, you know, after the fact, they have buyer's remorse. Like, oh man, I don't know if that's enough, you know, or they may not even know as soon as they hang up the phone. It might not be until, you know, a month later when they get the check in the mail. Oh, I don't think that's going to be enough I'm not going to make the truck payment this month because I didn't bid this high enough. You know, I've seen that a lot. Confidence in a negotiation is extremely important. So whoever, you know, a lot of people don't agree with my formula. A lot of people don't, you know, they've got their own way of doing it. Whatever system you choose to use, just stick with it and be confident. A couple of points I want to make about what your recommendation was. And I think it's good because in your recommendation, what Jason does covers everything at the house, right? I know there's a lot of new owner operators that are listening, and they're going to try to build their business based on what their projections are. They don't know. They might be living, you know, in an apartment. I actually mentored somebody that, we met at a homeless shelter, literally got a job as a truck driver because he didn't have any place to live. And he thought, well, at least I could be working and live in the truck, right? In that case, he has no home
Right.
expenses. Okay. So on the flip side of that, I had an attorney. He retired out of the state of, I think it was Indiana, moved down here to Florida, and heard that there was really good money in trucking, and it was something he always wanted to do. And he was living in this, $500,000 house and was driving a Mercedes, and he thought it'd be great. He went out and paid cash for a truck and all that. But, when it came down to it, it wasn't enough money to justify his time. He thought that he'd be making all this money because his friends told him, oh, yeah, I'm getting these $10,000 weeks. And he didn't know what the expenses were, right?
Mm-hmm.
So can a truck driver, going back to my example before, how much would you pay somebody else to drive your truck? And there's people that'll say, I can do it for 32 cents a mile. Could this attorney in a $500,000 house afford his lifestyle at 32 cents per mile? No. At 50 cents a mile, could he afford it? Maybe. I mean, but so I like what you have done. You've got your expenses and your household expenses and personal stuff, and you've lumped that all together, and you know that you can pay you can pay your mortgage and all that stuff. That's important. But when people are first starting out, I think it's important to realize that you have to base this on truck drivers' wages as well. So, I mean, you've got a broad spectrum here. And when you're trying to figure out what should you pay your driver, I like to do it the other way around. I like to say, well, I'm going to pay myself 50 cents a mile. Maybe that's $1,500 a week or whatever a reasonable wage would be. And then could you afford to live on that? That's if I went and got a job, let's say I was in an accident. I lost the truck and I lost my ability to insure myself. I can't do it anymore. I have to go get a job. Would I be able to sustain my lifestyle on normal truck driver wages? Or would I depend on being an owner-operator and being able to live on the current rates? So when people are first starting especially, I try to coach them to pick what would you pay your driver. And, 50 cents per mile, you drive down the road, you see these trailers with, we'll pay 50 cents per mile on whatever. So I think 50 cents per mile for an owner-operator is a fair wage to just kind of start with. Tweak it from there. Just be cautious not to get into this basing all of your home expenses and, this is what I make and everything else is profit, because it could land people that are less familiar, could land them in some hot water.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that because they wouldn't know know what their operating costs were, and like you said, 2 months off a year is easy. I mean, I think I only worked like 278 days last year.
Oh yeah, and that was that actually working, or that was just you're away from home? That's what you claim per diem.
That was just per diem 278, and.
So that was
than that I actually worked. I had so much layover,
Yeah, so, you've got your 34-hour restarts on the road. You've got, you book a load on Friday that can't deliver till Monday, and you sit for a day on Sunday or so, those kinds of things. So that all adds up. So your actual revenue-generating days was in the neighborhood of that, probably that 220 or something in there. So your actual days away from home was more, but the days that you actually are out generating revenue is not. So that's another thing. And, going back to my other point, the reason that I'm putting that little warning or disclaimer out there is because right now rates are phenomenal. I know there are people going out buying their first truck for the first time. They are going to do what you said, and they're going to, how much can I make, and what kind of lifestyle can I live on? They're going to go out there, and they might be making, they've never made this kind of money before in their life. And they go out and they buy a new car, and they buy a boat and a jet ski and a new, Harley, and they go do that because they've never made this much before. But
bad money managed.
Exactly. And then, in a couple of years when rates average out again, they can't afford their lifestyle. So for the new folks out there that are listening, pick a reasonable wage that you could afford to pay somebody else, or that you would pay somebody else, and base your lifestyle on that. Put the rest in savings, in retirement, in a rainy day fund, and be prepared for the worst until you have a pretty fat chunk in the bank, because this market will turn. So I just want to throw that warning out.
Oh yeah, I hope it lasts a little bit longer than 1 year. Maybe we can get 2 years out of it. But yeah, I figure it'll come back. Just what was it? 2015 when everything fell?
Yeah, 2014
Yeah,
was
2014 was a good year.
Yeah, 2014 we were setting records. I talked about it for years. I compared everything to 2014. 2015, it started off okay, a little above average and tapered down. And then, the end of 2015 and into 2016, we were really running, the average rates were really just above cost. They really were.
Yeah. Yeah, it was tough. I mean, I still did well, which bodes well, for
Right.
when rates do turn. But yeah, it was tough. It got tight. Right. I bought this trailer that I'm pulling right now. Actually, when it was like the worst, because I was about to go out of business with the other trailer. It was just too heavy.
Yeah.
And that's why I bought this trailer. It was like a last ditch effort, and it worked out. And but yeah, it was tough that year. I think it was like 2015. Yeah, it was a rough year that year.
Yeah, absolutely. So I appreciate the call, Chris. I'm going to throw you back on hold. I've got another caller on the line that I'm going to jump over to. We're already going a little overtime. Somehow I always do that. I don't know why I say this is an hour-long show. We're going into hour and a half, 2 hours every time now. But we'll go to Sean in North Carolina. Welcome to the show. And what's on your mind?
Hey, thanks, Kenny. I've been listening to you for a couple years now. Finally made that jump and got my authority. Been running.
Congratulations.
About, 2 weeks now. Well, thank you, and I appreciate it. I appreciate your help getting all the knowledge I needed to get it done so I can be confident in doing it. But my question now that I'm in real-world situation, I run in a team truck. I've been for the last 2 weeks. I'm in North Carolina right now. I'm actually from Arizona. But, when I'm looking at the load boards and say going from this lane from here in North Carolina to California, it'll say the average lane rate is, say, $4,000.
Okay.
Now, when they don't post a price on that load, what I've done is I've negotiated every single load above and beyond, the average or above the posted rates. But is there a general rule of thumb? I've realized it's easy to get like $200 is what I found the number is. It's easy usually to get them to bump it up, even if they posted a rate that's well above average. But is there a general rule of thumb? Like, are you looking? See, my goal is to make as much money as I possibly can for whatever lane I'm in.
Of course, yeah.
But for that lane, $4,000 to go to California, and I'm seeing people post it for $5,500, $5,000. What is there a general rule of thumb? Like, how much would you try shooting that lane for, as far as negotiating wise?
Okay, well, first of all, comparing previous averages is a good way to kind of gauge the market. Let me ask you this first: what level load board are you using? I'm assuming you're using DAT.
Yeah, and what I do is I just scour both DAT and truck stop, and I have the edge for the DAT.
Okay, so with that level,
Trucker's Edge.
With that level, you are seeing 90-day averages. Okay, so that's good. I mean, it's good to know what the averages are on any given lane, but 90-day averages, when you're looking at February, we are currently in the slowest season of the year right now. Okay, but we're also in a really unique situation because even though we're in the slowest season, rates right now are higher than they were for the past 2 years combined. Other than they've tapered off over the past couple of weeks, they spiked, mid-January, and they've tapered off a few pennies. But even right now, like van rates, particularly, they are higher right now than they were the entire 2015 or 2016 at any given point. Okay, so we're in a weird situation. Now, what that means is your 90-day averages are way off, okay, because it's 90 days. 90 days was, you're going back into before the Christmas season, and, you're taking into effect the lull that always happens between the holidays, between Christmas, New Year's. That whole week is kind of screwed up. Early January is kind of messed up because people are just coming back. And now going into this weird season, I mean, 90 days is... It's always good to have some information, but that's about as vague as it gets. That being said,
I think I might have got that wrong because I got the one below the power, and when it says the lane, it says 15D, so
okay.
I imagine that's 15-day average.
Yes.
So that's what I'm running off of it.
So you pay like $100 a month for that?
Yeah.
Okay, so you do have 15-day averages. All right, so that's my first point. It's good to make sure that you have the most current information. So for everybody else that's listening that does have the $45 a month, Members Edge plan or something like that, just keep in mind 90-day averages can be very misleading. 15-day averages are a lot better representation of the market. Just keep in mind that you still have your seasonal, trends happening. You still have the different lanes across the country, which vary greatly. You still have your, Florida is still a bad market compared to the Midwest and so forth. You have to look at your inbound and outbound ratios. You still have to look at your load to truck ratios. There's a lot of factors that play into this. The East Coast to California, anywhere on the East Coast to California, is one of the cheapest lanes on the market in general, period. Because a lot of vans and reefers are trying to get to that California freight. There's a lot of stuff, especially reefers, coming out, produce, melons, the ports, all that stuff moving to the East Coast. So there's a lot of cheap freight, and I say cheap, but there's a lot of the lower rate paying lanes are from the East Coast back to California. And the trying to get that equipment relocated back to the West Coast is one reason. The other reason is, and going back to my quoting the load example, longer lanes pay less. They just do, because your cost is distributed over that many more miles. So if I book a load with you that's 250 miles, picked today, delivers tomorrow morning, you're going to have to charge me a higher rate per mile to cover your costs than if I book a load with you that's 3,000 miles coast to coast, because you can maximize run 700 miles, almost 800 miles a day. So those costs are spread out over 800 miles. So longer runs pay less. If you ever tried to lease to a carrier that pays on a mileage basis, I get emails all the time from various carriers trying to convince me to go pull their freight on a mileage contract. They tend to have a tiered rate. So 0 to 250 miles pays, might pay $1.25 a mile. 0 or 250 to 500 miles might pay $1.20 a mile. 500 to 1,000 might pay, $1 a mile, and above 1,000 might be. And that's why, because the more miles you run, the longer the runs are, the more it spreads out, and the more productivity, mileage-wise, more miles you can put in the time frame. Okay, so longer runs plus relocating equipment, it's in a more inexpensive lane. Now, how much would I bid on that? There's a few things that I like to do. I like to look at the market. I like to look at the lane. I like to look at what other people are doing and the averages. I like to know my own costs. Okay, so those two have to combine. What is my cost? What is the average lane paying? All right, so if my cost is $1.50 per mile, but the lane is paying $2.50 per mile, I'm going to try to get at least that $2.50 per mile, take that difference and call that profit, or set it aside, because if it's $2.50 a mile going one way, it might only be $1.20 going the other way, and that has to average out to still be above my rate. Okay, so I have to take in all of that. I have to understand what the market is on the lane I'm taking, plus what the market is when I get where I'm going. So do the research. I always like to do a backwards and forward search. So what I'll do is, I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina, trying to go to Los Angeles. I'll do a search, and I'll see that there are, 1,000 loads moving on that lane. Then I'll look and I'll do a search. What's moving out of Los Angeles? There might be, 5,000 loads moving out of Los Angeles. So I know my market, coming back, the trucks that are going in, there's less trucks going in than there are coming back out. And inbound outbound ratios are a better prediction of future markets than load to truck ratios. Load to truck ratios, typically, if you look at DAT's hot market map, for example, that is yesterday's information. That's how many loads were posted on average versus how many trucks were posted yesterday. That does not tell me what it's going to be like tomorrow, or if I'm booking a load from North Carolina to California, that's 4 or 5 days from now. That doesn't tell me anything. But what I can find out in 4 or 5 days is inbound to outbound ratios. So if there is, like I said, if I just do a search, set Los Angeles as a destination from anywhere, leave the origin blank, I can see that there might be, like I said, 10,000 loads inbound, and then do a search, set Los Angeles as the origin, there might be only 1,000 outbound. There's a lot more loads going in than coming out. Or you might find it the other way. There's a lot more loads, a lot more loads coming out than going in. So you know that the truck to load ratio in a few days, when those loads start to deliver, that will be in your favor or against you. So you can use that as part of your research as well. How much would I bid on that load? I would aim really, really high. If they have it, if it's the average 15 days is $4,400. We know that over the past few weeks we've been going down for whatever reason. They have it posted at $5,200, which is above the average. I would do all my research, figure out why. First of all, is it higher? I would call on it. I would get all the details. Part of negotiating is asking a lot of questions. So I wouldn't just say, what is the rate? They're posting the rate. For me, when I'm negotiating, the rate is the absolute last thing I want to look at. Matter of fact, I like to be able to hide that rate category on the load board. I advise most people, do not pull up a search on your load board and search it by that rate column. I guarantee you, every time a broker posts a rate, they're trying to move that load faster and cheaper. And it works. A load with a rate that's posted will move. If it's the top on the list, it will move 6 times faster. If it's the bottom load on the list of posted rates, it'll move 3 times faster, okay, than a load that doesn't have any rate posted. That might mean that that bottom load that has a rate posted, the lowest posted rate is going to move 3 times faster than a load that does not have a posted rate, just because it's easier and it'll generate more phone calls. The next load under that will probably pay more. The next load. So if you search by rate, and you might have, say you have one that starts at $6,000 from North Carolina to California, and it goes down in $500 increments. You have 10 loads, and they go down to, I don't know, $4,000, $3,500 going wherever they're going. And then the next load under that doesn't have a rate posted at all, okay? You don't know. That next load might pay more than all of the above. You don't know. And the other thing about having a posted rate, you don't know any details. That top load is paying $6,000. The next one's only paying $4,000. Well, why? You got to call them and find out. Well, you find out it's got 10 drops on it. Or it's going to sit on the trailer. They need you to drop the trailer for 48 hours and, pick it up and then relay somewhere and lay over and all this. And you find out that that's why they're paying more. Does that mean that that's the load you should take?
Well, what I got a question is, so say the top load of the money rate is paying $5,500 and the lane is paying $4,400.
Okay.
The one that doesn't post a rate, is that the one you're trying to negotiate $5,500 for still?
Sure, absolutely.
I mean, is that an acceptable rate to throw that out?
Oh, if they are posting a load, what'd you say it was, $5,500? If they are posting a load for $5,500, and I see that they're already $500 above the average, when I call them, I'm gonna find out why. There's got to be a reason. If there's nothing special about it, let's just say it's a normal.
What I've noticed recent.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I'm gonna say if there's nothing special about that load.
What
let me finish my point and I'll let you go. If there's nothing special about that load, I am going to quote substantially higher, even if they have a posted rate, because I need to see if there is room to negotiate. There might not be. They may actually post it for all they have in it because they want to get it moved 6 times faster. They're going to post it for every penny. They got to get it moved right now. They're going to post it, get the phone calls. You're going to call. I like to still aim extremely high, $1,000 higher. If they flinch at that and they say, and they hang up on you, I would call them back and say, we must have got disconnected. So what can you do on this load? If they say, well, this is all I've got in it, then you have to decide, is that worth taking it? If it is, you can accept it. You see it's $1,000 more than the lane. On the flip side, if you call somebody else doesn't have a posted lane, or they have one that's posted at $4,000, I would absolutely still quote, $6,000. Why? Because you have a backup plan. You have a BATNA, best alternative to a negotiated agreement. Your best alternative is I could still take this load for $5,500. He's got it posted that way. Why would I take yours for $4,000? And you can tell him that. And I have a better alternative. I can do this. Why would I do that? So, yes, absolutely use that in your negotiations. And, if the next guy answers the phone with it doesn't have a posted rate and he says, well, I'm paying $6,000, I probably wouldn't tell him that your next best alternative was the $5,500 posted rate. Okay, so that's all part of the negotiation. Get as much information about the load as you can. So, and what were you saying? Go ahead.
You actually just answered it. That was exactly what I was saying. Is what I've been noticing is when they've actually started posting the highest rates, it's because it has to be picked up now. But there's one other thing. You've heard of the 4 o'clock hustle?
Yep.
The 4 p.m. hustle or the noon hustle?
Yep.
What are your thoughts on that?
It absolutely works, and I'll tell you why. Okay, so there's 3 times a day when it's best to book a load and to post your truck. First thing is first thing in the morning, because the brokers come into the office at 7, 8 a.m., and they have a list of loads they've got to get moved. Customers are expecting them picked up. They got to move today. A lot of businesses close at 5 o'clock, so book a load first thing in the morning, okay? That'll keep you moving through daylight hours. Or book things right at about 11 o'clock in the morning. And most of these are Eastern time. A lot of brokers work either in Central or Eastern time. There are some on the West Coast, but most are either like in the Chicago area, maybe some Texas, or East Coast time. So 11 a.m. Eastern time is a good time because it's right before they go to lunch. Because if they don't book a truck around noontime, if they come back at 1, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, if they book a truck then, chances are there won't be time for that truck to get to the pickup before 5 o'clock. So 11 o'clock is another hot time. All right, the absolute best time of the day to book something, and if you are patient and willing, and this takes a lot of patience and a lot of willingness to fail. You got to be ready, because if you are running and you're rubbing pennies together to get by, you're probably not willing to do this because you're afraid that and this goes back to what I was talking about with Chris, being confident. If you are afraid that you're going to sit and you're going to lose money, and you're willing to just take the next best thing that pops up because it's almost 5 o'clock and you're afraid that you're not going to get a load today, you will lose, okay? But if you are confident in your numbers, you know what you're doing, 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 3, 4 o'clock hustle, absolute best time to get rates. So a good way to run on the spot market is book a load 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon that can pick up. And you want to you want to position yourself in the best markets available. So figure out where, if you're in Chicago, I wouldn't even post your truck. Don't even try until 3 or 4 o'clock. Okay. You might post it and see what happens, but chances are you will get better rates around 3 or 4 o'clock. Because that broker has to get that load moved, or they might need the customer might need it. If they don't pick it up this evening at 6, 7 o'clock in the evening, they might need it picked up first thing in the morning. So that truck has to be there at 6 a.m., 7 a.m. So they will pay premiums. They'll also have issues that arise throughout the day. A truck will fall off, truck breaks down, and so forth. Happens throughout the day. They're going home at 5 o'clock. They have to get that load covered. So 3 or 4 o'clock is by far the best time on the spot market to book a load. So a good business model, I guess you'd say, would be run at night and sleep in the day. If you can deliver a load at 6, 7 in the morning, ideally, go to bed, post your truck around 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. This is only when you're good markets, by the way. And take the calls, book your loads 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, pick one up that evening, deliver it the next morning. That's probably on the spot market the key to making the most money and running those lanes that nobody else wants to run. Mike calls into the show, garbage, crap, and bees. Do the stuff nobody else wants to do. He runs a step deck, he runs, trash, he runs bees, and the stuff nobody else wants to cover because that pays the best. And then run the miles that nobody likes to run. People that are booking these team runs, they like to run those 3,000-mile loads. They're going to be cheaper. So book the stuff that's, 150 miles. It picks up this morning, delivers tomorrow. Most people I know for a fact, most people have that mentality of, I'm out here to make miles. I'm out here to make miles. That's what they say to themselves. That's what their dispatcher thinks. So they're out here and they only look for miles. I have a driver that on Fridays, he searches the load board, sorts those by miles, because over the weekend he is looking to move, 2,500, 3,000 miles over the weekend, because that's his money load, right? Because he doesn't have to book anything on Saturday, Sunday. The brokers are closed. Well, there was a time when he called me and he said, I don't know why this broker keeps calling me. I've got my truck posted. I don't want to go. He was in I think, Pennsylvania, and it was a short load, just a couple hundred miles going into Massachusetts. I don't know why he keeps calling me. I told him I'm on, it's Friday. I'm not interested in that load. I said, well, what rate did you quote him? I didn't quote him anything because I'm looking for something longer for the weekend. I said, no, driver. I'm not going to say his name is Jason. If he's listening, I don't think he'll mind telling the story. So I said, no, Jason, you're not looking to make miles this weekend. You're looking to make money this weekend. Okay? Tell the broker what you're trying to do. Because you have a problem. He has a problem. He has to get this load moved over the weekend. That's his problem. You are trying to make a certain amount of money. That is that's your goal here. That's what you're trying to do. You need to come together to solve each other's problems. So that broker called him back. And there's another negotiation that I say, if you don't want to take this load, just give him what you absolutely would do it for. And he might not agree to that. So you're essentially telling him no. It's called the Japanese no. A couple of my drivers here have really shot themselves in the foot with it because they threw out their Japanese no, which is to quickly summarize that. In the Japanese language, there are like 1,500 words. I don't speak Japanese. I don't know, but this is what I've read. There's like 1,500 words that translate to yes, the word yes, okay? But there's virtually nothing that directly translates to the word no, all right? So the Japanese people, because of the way that they're a very proud culture, they don't tell people no. They're not going to disgrace somebody by saying you made an offer and I'm not going to take it, right? The Japanese don't do that. What they do instead is in negotiation, they call it the Japanese no, because what they do is they give a yes answer, but they give it in such a way that essentially it means no. In negotiation, that might mean conditions that probably cannot be met. You're giving them an offer, yes, you're giving them a yes answer, you're giving them an offer, but essentially telling them you're not interested. In the case of my driver, Jason, I said, look, you're trying to make $3,000 this weekend or $3,500, whatever the number was. He's only got this load that's a couple hundred miles. Tell him you'll do it, but you're going to have the $3,000. He says, I can't do that. That 300-mile load's not going to be worth that. So I said, okay. The next time the broker called, it actually rang on my phone. And I told the broker, I said, well, the driver's not willing to do that. He's trying to do this for the weekend, and this is the number. He's trying to get the $3,000 for the weekend. He said, well, give me a minute. Okay, is the truck available? So I called Jason. I said, well, guess what? That broker called back. He's willing to do the $3,000. And Jason was floored. Couldn't believe it. Yeah, I mean, he was thrilled, but it was a Japanese no. I'm not willing to do it unless you throw this out there. Now, a couple of my other drivers, Chris was on. He mentioned that we've got another driver named Jason. They throw that all the time. Our other driver, Jason, he's our highest grossing flatbed, and he uses the Japanese no technique on several times a week, but somehow it gets accepted, and he's killing it with the numbers, and but he's throwing out numbers that most people would they couldn't say with a straight face, and the brokers are turning around and say, well, you're the only guy willing to do it and does a great job at it, and turn around, we get that load. So use that technique. Throw out numbers. If you don't want to load, throw out a number that you don't think they're going to agree to.
Okay. That's good information. I have one last question. Tomorrow I'm unloading at 7 p.m. I've never tried to get a load after 7 p.m. Is that feasible?
Well, where will you be?
Pretty much done.
I mean, if you're in the middle of Arizona,
I'll actually be in Oklahoma.
Oklahoma. Are you going to be near Oklahoma City or Tulsa? Tulsa. Yeah, there's a few places that you might get some out of. What type of freight do you pull?
Drive-in.
Drive-in? Yeah, there's a few places. I mean, I would post the truck and see what happens. I wouldn't, at that time of night, I wouldn't necessarily be expecting it, but I would post the truck around, do the 3, 4 o'clock hustle, and, maybe you try to book a load for the next morning, but that's still the best time to book it. The other thing
90 seconds
to make sure that you take into account is that, and pay no attention to the English voice there. We'll keep going until we've got everything answered. But the other thing to take into account is how many hours of service you have left. You know, you don't want to book a load and only have an hour or two to get there and then shoot yourself in the foot on the other side. Is it better if you deliver at 7 o'clock in the evening, you know, to take your 10-hour break and plan on picking something up in the morning? You know, so
60 seconds.
It can average out. Make sure that you what I've seen happen is somebody will be short on hours, especially with the ELD mandate, which is all the more reason to take time into account. And they'll excuse me, they will book a load, only have a couple hours left. They'll go pick it up, do their 10-hour break, but then they can't make the next day appointment. So because of their 10-hour break, and that load that should have been a next day load turns into a 2-day load. They end up shooting themselves in the foot just because of that. Versus if they deliver at 7 o'clock, they take a 10-hour break, pick something up first thing in the morning, and they've got the full clock to drive, and it keeps them on a better schedule, and it's more productive for the time frame. So you have to take all that into account, of course.
Correct. And well, I said I run a team, and I was just
10
trying to figure
seconds.
out whether, if we deliver at 7 o'clock in the afternoon, whether my day is pretty much shot, or whether we can keep going.
And it's not, especially if you're running a team truck. Now, if you're running a team, you're basically ready to go at any time. Now, Elizabeth and I used to run as a team. We would keep our truck posted 24 hours a day. And I remember this, I mean, I can remember several times where 11 or 12 o'clock in the evening, somebody will call and say, hey, you've got a team truck posted, especially a team truck. Make sure you post it as a team as well. But especially a team truck, 11 to 12 o'clock at night. Hey, I see you have a team truck posted. I had a truck breakdown. This delivery has to happen tomorrow morning. I've got a blank check right here. What can we do? Because they're going to call a team for a save the day load because they know that you have the hours and time to make it run. Versus a solo is probably in bed, won't even answer the phone. So a team has that advantage. I would keep the truck posted. You may get lucky. I wouldn't always plan on that. If you can book something for the next morning, or if you can pre-book something, there is a lot of value to keeping a team moving. So trying to book something ahead of time is not a horrible idea because a team can generate more profit by keeping the wheels turning. But if you don't have something booked, keep your truck posted, and you never know what'll happen.
Great, Kenny. I appreciate all the information. It's been great. Thank you so much.
All right, Sean, I really appreciate the support and the call. We are out of time for tonight. I am gonna flip through some of these quick comments here. David mentioned, and we were talking about rates. He said also make sure you save for taxes. Plan for that, which is really good advice. A lot of people don't plan for the taxes. And I think we've answered most of these questions just in our discussion. So, all right. There is one other last final thought that I want to make before I wrap things up tonight. And I'm going to dedicate another show to this. I'll probably talk about this more next week. But in this market, it's very tempting to burn some bridges. Hold the brokers, hold the customers over the fire on rates because there's nobody else that can do it, right? Now, there's a tactful way to do it, which I recommend, and you can build some good relationships that way. But there's also ways that the brokers will essentially black flag you. And I don't want to get too far into this rabbit hole right now, but relationships are a key to success. I don't care what business you're in. I don't care if you sell bagels. I don't care if you own a car dealership. I don't care if you're a salesperson. I don't care if you own retail or if you're in the service industry or whatever industry you are in. Relationships are extremely important for long-term success. An important lesson that you can learn is that you can go fast by yourself. Okay, you can make a lot of money by yourself, quick. But if you want to go far, you really need a team. You really have to have help. If you burn a lot of bridges, if you don't have help, if you don't have the team behind you, and it doesn't have to be somebody that you work with, it doesn't have to be an employee or a partner in your team truck. What I mean is partnership with customers, with brokers, that partnership will take you further long term. You want to go fast, go by yourself. Okay? Right now, there's a lot of people moving fast, and there's going to be a lot of people bankrupt when this market, if it ever tanks or plateaus. Go fast, go by yourself. You want to go far, you need a team. Build those relationships now. Now is the time to solve a lot of problems. There will be a lot of people that are struggling to find a truck, struggling to find the right thing. There's a lot of, especially in a niche market, a lot of people were in niche markets that saw that there's money to be made out on the spot market. So get out there, find those niches that are still available, solve the problems for people. Great way to build relationships. One point that I think is extremely important: you do not have to take a lower rate to build a relationship. You don't have to, do somebody a favor to build a relationship, but do something that sets you apart. Okay? Meet them in person. Just go by their office and say hello. You don't have to buy them lunch or coffee, anything. Just say hello. I guarantee you they'll remember you. When you're on a load, maybe you never meet them in person, but you're dealing with them on the phone. Communication is extremely important. You don't know how many brokers or how many carriers are out here that don't even make a phone call. Don't tell it, brokers are panicked. Where is this load? I don't know if it'll be delivered. They have no clue. That's why there's so much, micromanagement in this industry, because there are a lot of really piss poor carriers out here. I'm sorry, but there are. Set yourself apart. Build those relationships. I guarantee you that those relationships will pay off in the long term. They may not pay off directly. The broker or the customer that you help today, they may not reciprocate that immediately, but they may help the next guy, or the next time that problem arises with somebody else, they may recommend you. But I promise you, building relationships will pay off in huge returns in the long term. I am going to dedicate a whole show just about relationships. We're going to talk about relationships next week. I'll talk about different ways you can do that to solve problems for people. But you cannot have the victim mentality. I brought this up. Again, this is one of these YouTube guys. I brought this up. I was talking about how important relationships were. His little YouTube video was about how relationships don't matter. He's supposed to be some kind of a business coach, and he does a lot of good information. But with that, I think was just the worst information he has ever put out, absolutely by far, to say relationships don't matter in business. And I think in his mind, he is the type of guy, and he is the one that talks about, get out there and make miles. In his mind, it's important to keep the wheels turning. He doesn't understand the business. He understands how to make more miles. And it's really sad for somebody to think that way in business. It's extremely important. Relationships, trying to see if our drivers are still on here. If my driver, Dave, is on. I think he's following. My driver, and he is. He went to a customer recently. The broker was having trouble covering this truck, and he didn't take a huge rate reduction. He went to the customer. He had all the supplies he needed. He had everything to do the load, right? Previous carriers fell through. He did a YouTube video on it, so it's not a secret. He was hauling windows, and previous carriers, they didn't have the right equipment. Got to the other end, windows were all broken. The drivers, the crew to unload them, they were frustrated. So this driver, every time he goes there, he does that crew a favor. He's got all the equipment. He's done a great job. He's, made friends with the crew that unloads them, and he does this on a regular basis. The first time out there, he bought the whole crew, he bought them all pizza out of his own pocket. In turn, that has become virtually a dedicated customer for this driver, for Dave. He is the go-to person. This broker is trying to find other work based on what we are willing to do for her. She calls us all the time. I'm looking to quote another customer about such and such run. Would you be willing to do that for me if I was to get this customer? She comes to us just to see if she can find us more work, because she knows that if she gets this customer, she's going to call Dave first to make the good impression. She's afraid to go out, get a new customer, and hope she tosses a coin and she gets a decent carrier to cover it. every time Dave goes to this job site now, he just went to one. He bought the crew a pack of cigarettes. Like I said, he bought pizza. He did not take a rate reduction. In fact, he took roughly the same rates that this broker was always paying, and now pays roughly $100 a trip more every time because they know, and Dave has become the go-to guy. Relationships are extremely important. We have dedicated runs now. We have routine freight. We have fantastic customers that call us on a regular basis, all because we built relationships with them. I don't think we ever took a lower rate to build a relationship, ever. But we've done some things for them that made us stand out. And now we are the go-to carrier. Dave is the go-to driver. This stuff works. For somebody to be some type of a business coach, an executive in this industry of some sort, and come out and say that relationships don't matter, to me, that person just, somebody needs to just turn them off. I can't even believe that somebody would say that. That being said, we are going to go ahead and wrap things up for the night. I had a whole lot of rants that I wanted to get out. We talked mostly on rates tonight. We're going to talk about relationships a little bit next week, and more from the social media questions, and of course more from your phone calls. So thank you all for joining me. Thank you all for the support. You can find this show and all the recorded shows at the truckingwithauthorityshow.com or truckingwithauthorityradio.com. Every week here on Tuesdays at 7 p.m. you can call into Blog Talk. Numbers at the bottom of the screen, 917-889-9924. We'll be live again next Tuesday evening, Eastern Time, 7 p.m. We're also streaming live on Facebook and simultaneously streaming on YouTube. Recorded shows will play on Thursdays at 7 p.m. on L&J Radio, so you don't have an excuse not to find us. And, of course, if you have questions or comments, you can call into the show, or you can find us on this discussions in the various Facebook groups. You can search for us at Trucking with Authority. And I will be at Matt's. I'm not sure. I don't think we're planning a few things. I don't think we're going to make it happen at Matt's, but I think it'll be exciting a couple months later in Dallas at GATS. It'll be exciting. I don't want to let the cat out of the bag just yet. There's some pretty cool stuff that we're cooking up right now. But I will be at Matt's. Elizabeth and I will be up there, and several of the Patriot Star drivers will be there. We'll probably have a little meeting and take the drivers out one evening out there. So that being said, thank you guys. Hopefully we see you in Louisville in a few weeks. Remember to dream big. There's no limit to how big you can dream, and don't ever shame yourself to think that your dreams are too big. As we were talking about with Gerald, being uncomfortable is what drives growth. Okay? Dream big and aim high, because as big as you can dream it, if you aim high enough, you can make it happen. We just hired another new owner-operator here, and I liked his saying, if you think pennies, you get pennies. If you think dollars, you get dollars. And it's the same with your goals. If your goal is small, you'll get it. If your goal is big, you'll get it. Okay, so aim high and strategize your plan. Make sure that you always have a plan. Write it in pencil and have a big eraser handy. Strategize your plan. Earn your success, because nobody deserves anything. You are not entitled to anything. You have to get out there and earn it. So earn your success, because only you drive you. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you for using Blog Talk Radio. Goodbye.